Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for coming all the way from your block party to join me today and tell you a little bit more about the Canary Islands. I know some of you came to hear Jasmine talk, and she gives a very thorough presentation of the specifics of what you will see when you go on the different tours. But I'm going to give a more general view of the Canary Islands, including some places where we're not going. But I'm sure, how many have you been there? I'm sure almost everybody's been there. See how many sailors we have, because it's a great destination when you cross the ocean. So ships have been coming there for years, and the Canary Islands originally were first visited by Phoenicians and then Romans, Berber from North Africa. And there are accounts of these islands going back into about 300 BC, actually, with the description of people who had large features and also large buildings. And this has led to some speculation that beyond what we can see today, there was actually a population that is prehistoric that was there. And so this is a kind of very mysterious island, and some disputes over what happened there. But of course, now what's going on is a great tourism industry, of which we're going to do our little part of it. Because these islands sort of hold a place for Spain and for Europe, comparable to the Hawaiian Islands, where everybody goes in the wintertime, and now many people have homes there, and about 15% of the 2 million residents are non-Spanish and non-Canary Islanders. So that's why when you go into the major cities, you see this very international place. Like the Hawaiian Islands, they're also geologically similar in the sense that they had a origin with a volcanic hotspot on the continental shelf, and so like the Hawaiian Islands, one island was created after the other, and someone just told me in the news that there's a current volcanic eruption off of La Hierra, the most western island, and there's expected to be another island made within the next few 100,000 years, so buy now before the property prices go down. But I'll show you a little bit more about them. This is actually Tenerife, where we're not stopping. That's the highest mountain of all, El Teide. But as you can see, the islands are really far from Spain and off the coast of Morocco, a good 800 nautical miles from where we just were in Tangier. And this is the most extended part of the European Union is out on these islands, and then not on this particular illustration is the cousin island of Madeira, which is about 200 sea miles north of the Canary Islands. But the Spanish have been coming along with Portuguese and all these other people over these various centuries, and so it is part of actually two provinces of Spain are the Canary Islands, between Las Palmas and the Gran Canaria. There's a political line, so they have their own representatives in Madrid. And then you can see they're only about 50 nautical miles off the coast of Morocco. Now, of course, this part of Morocco used to be Spanish colony also. And there's some disputes over where the line is drawn, and they have some claims on Morocco has claims on the subsea floor here, not unlike, let's say, Argentina and the Falklands. But I won't go into that right now. I'll just show you, of course, this is the 7 islands. There's where we're going first, Lanzarote, Fuerteventura, Gran Canaria, where we'll go next, then Tenerife, the largest island, also the highest island in the sense of the mountain in the center. But then we're going to go over to La Palma, and La Gomera and El Hierro are the smaller islands that we are just going to go sailing by. But altogether, they are called the Canaries. The name comes from the Latin term, which is the origin of is cane, or dogs, because there were wild dogs all over these islands. And so that's the symbol of the island, and the coat of arms, which has the Spanish royal crown and the 7 islands and the dogs bowing to the crown, and Oceania. Now, each island has its own local autonomous community political representation and its own flag. So you'll see this along with the Spanish and the EU flag wherever we go. I'm a collector of flags, so I keep trying to go find these every time I come. This is a drawing from William Dampier, the adventurer, pirate, and illustrator and amateur scientist. And this is a typical sea illustration of his period in the 1700s, where the outline of islands were drawn, so when you get close you could recognize them and also know where to go. And so when the Europeans started coming in, there were the native Aboriginal people called Guanche, who were on all of these islands, and they were sort of an amalgam of, we're not sure where they came from. They're probably related to the Berber people, or some say they are mixed with the remnant Phoenicians, Carthaginians, and other visitors over the centuries, but they were a Neolithic people. They had no iron, no wheel, no written language. They did have a number system, though, that was related perhaps to the Berber script, which is now itself extinct. But here is the final Castilian conqueror of the major islands, Alfonso Ferrandalusa, who brought captives to present to Ferdinand and Isabella. At that time, of course, Portugal and Spain were competing for the control of these islands, and the Portuguese had landed there first, were driven out, and of course there were conflicts over all of this new land that was subsequently discovered as they would sail off from the Canaries to the Americas. But the Spanish held these islands and had a treaty in 1497 that Portugal would keep Madeira and the Spanish would keep the Canary Islands, of course a better prize in a sense. But this is one of the towns they set up in Gran Canaria. This is the town of Lugano. And as we go around, you'll see these are very typical traditional towns, but they're like in central Spain. But the land is so dramatically different. First of all, it's all mostly volcanic with some sedimentary uplift, but here's sort of these, what they call the orgonos, or the organ pipes. Something similar, there's a site like this in Ireland. And then as you go upland, it's incredibly steep, up to over 3,000 meters of the highest mountains of these islands, the highest being Tenerife. But in between, there's a very rugged forests, and often in clouded. So this is called the Laurisilva, or the mountain laurel, sort of a semi-tropical jungle. The lowlands were covered with many pines and many ancient trees that were mostly felled over the centuries to build ships, and this was a major source of lumber for particularly the Spanish to build their great galleon fleets, leading to the deforestation of much of the islands, especially in all the lowlands. So this is a view from La Gomera to Tenerife, and you can see it's so volcanic, arid. What forests remain are usually on the western side of the island, where it's the Sahara winds don't dry them out, dry the land out, and then allow this vegetation to regrow. But a lot of it's really a desert, especially these islands, Lanzarote, where we're going, and Fuerteventura. These are barren in many places, and we'll see that if you haven't been to these islands. Lanzarote, where we're going first to the capital, Arrecife, has very little vegetation on many parts of it, and then it has great lava fields and burnt land, I'd say. It reminds me of my home state of New Mexico. So this is Hacha Grande, a mountain on the south side of Lanzarote. There's also the lava fields up to the Montaña de Fuego, the fiery mountains, and Jasmine showed a few pictures. It's very dramatic and colorful rock formations, which show how the land has been laid over with different flows and then picked up and turned around, and so it's very dramatic geology. And some of it is still so hot, as you may have read or heard, that there are places where the subsoil is still very, very hot, so you could pour water, it'll come out in a steam, or you put wood on stick it in the ground, it'll catch fire. So this is pretty rugged land for settlers, and the better agriculture and settlements were made in the western islands. So again, this is a desert condition that is similar to parts of Africa, of course, the African Great Sahara Desert's nearby. So you have very limited vegetation on the eastern islands of Lanzarote. Here's some of the straw flowers that come out of the succulents. And it's hard to imagine that these people live there, but back when it was, let's say, they had very little impact on the land. The Guanche were never many of them, maybe 10 to 20,000 on all of the islands. And they had a subsistence agriculture, hunters and gatherers primarily though, and they lived off of mountain sheep and goats and then the wild dogs, which they would herd. So this is one of the local chieftains. There are a few statues around in the different islands because those people had their own little kingdoms, not just each island, but within the islands, and so they were warlike between themselves. And when the conquistadores came over, they would side with one tribe against the next, and this was, in a sense, a pattern that then was copied in the Americas. And you might call the Canary Islands the first of the Spanish Empire's colonies, and now the last one, but it is thoroughly Spanish. It has no indigenous population that is ready to have independence, though about 15% of the DNA in the old residents of Canary Islands come from the Guanche. So there was intermarriage as their culture disappeared. But there are no reservations or villages that are purely Guanche anymore. What remain, though, are some of these rock carvings. You can't quite see them. They're sort of spirals, and they're symbology of their worship of the sun and the moon. And there's not much known about it because they had no written language, and what was left was suppressed and not recorded. But they keep finding in excavations more of their idols, like this is a famous figure of perhaps a fertility god or someone who just had too much for dinner. I'm not sure what. But you can see this in the shops. That's the one in the museum, but you can take one home and say, look what I might have become had I gone on a different cruise. But so this is a little remnant of their culture left. Here's a stone that was excavated in 1992 called the Zanata stone, which has some markings on it, and it's not sure if those were the Guanche themselves or whether that was a Phoenician language or a Berber indication, and so it was immediately dubbed the Rosetta Stone, where they might understand something of the written language that they may have had or may have received. But again, there's very, very little evidence. In one part of the islands, I came upon a display where they made a little model of the Guanche cave dwellings because they didn't build houses. They all lived in these very porous mountains. And then they had piles of stones for indication of their territory, and they gathered their sheep and their wild dogs together, and that's their primary source of food, along with wild foraging of plants. But they also practiced mummification, and they would wrap a body, it would dry out quickly, they'd put kind of a honey resin over it, and then they would put it in caves in the mountains, and they're still finding them out in the most remote parts of the mountains. This is not uncommon in other cultures around the world, but they have brought some down into the museums and studied them to learn about their physiology. In one place I went, they had a Guanche cave that was open, and you can imagine this is your front door, and you come in and there's your living room and your place to camp out, I guess. But so they truly were cave dwellers, which of course always makes me feel like selling my house and moving in there. But here's one of the mummies I found in those caves. So this was perhaps a ritual that, or a death process that came from Africa, even all the way from Egypt, because there's some similarities in the way they were wrapped. But that again goes into prehistory, we just don't know. Well, that little model shows this fellow coming down from the mountain with whatever he caught up there. And this leads to the thought that the whistling language that Jasmine mentioned, or actually, sorry, John Bell mentioned, is a way of communicating across the valleys and the mountains, which still has a remnant in the island of La Gomera. It's called the Silbo Gomera. And this is now a protected or an appreciated cultural artifact, and UNESCO has noted on it. I found a recording of it, so if you bear with my computer here a minute, I'll find it. And nope, that's not it. Pardon, I have to go dig into my system here to find it. And I'm just going to play it for you if it'll come through. There we go. Well, I believe you heard that. It's just out of my computer, but it did not come with a text, unfortunately. But I think he was saying, "Kid, go to the village and get me some rum and put it on my credit card. And by the way, I want it shaken and not stirred." But don't know. But this was just about to die out when it was recognized by linguists. I have a friend who's an ethnographer who made a film of this whistling language compared to, there's also one in the Basque Land and there's one in Nepal. And so these mountainous people, they developed this kind of way of communicating, and each whistle sound is either a consonant or a vowel in their spoken language, so that it follows enough so that kids can learn it also. And now in La Gomera, they teach it in school. And so now it's a matter of local pride that you can whistle while you work or whatever they do with it, along with their phones, of course. Well, here's Lanzarote again. This is the flag. And this, again, is a rugged island surrounded with various beaches, some of which are sand beaches, other which are caldera that have fallen into the sea. Because you see, this is a black sand beach. There are also lava tubes. Jasmine showed some of that go right into the sea. It's a very dramatic landscape. And here are the lipi, which are the stone containers for the grapes that are grown on the ground, not on a trellis or anything, because of the constant winds that will dry out the plant and or blow it over. And so this creates their local wine called the Malsilva. And so that's a sweet wine that is a specialty of Lanzarote. They also used to be a major salt producer. Here's the Salinas de Unibuno, which were the great trade there. Other islands made their economy out of sugarcane especially, but Lanzarote is so dry that they were in the salt trade while it was still a good business before other forms of salt were made commercially available. But much of the island is really a lava field, like here in the Montañas de Fuego. So it's very rugged, and there's no settlement in all these areas. Now they're national parks and they're visited, but it's not as hospitable as the other islands. Now then we go to Gran Canaria, which is a sort of a round pile of, again, volcanic mountains with great calderas up, and we'll come up to the northeast corner, which is Las Palmas de Gran Canaria, and that's the major city and the major port of all of the islands. Many visitors, of course, come here. The Canary Islands altogether only have about 2 million residents, but they get over 10 million visitors a year. So they have 30 to 35% of their whole economy is in the touristic services. And so when you're landing there in day after tomorrow, you can see on the right side of this photo, that's the Great Harbor, which is a very, very large protected harbor. And then the development goes on. There's over 250,000 people in the city itself, and that the hills in the background, that's called La Isleta, the island that is overlooking the city. And then you have another beach on the western side, which is a resort beach. But when you come here, I'm sure many of you have been there, it's a very dense city in a modern Spanish style with a lot of services, museums and galleries, and so it's pretty busy as a city. And this is the beach side of the city. You can see those tiered condominiums and hotel resorts. But there are many other places all around the island. This is where we'll land right and see the docks, and they have a beautiful park there right in the front where we will land with visiting ships. And so this is a busy harbor. You can walk into town, and particularly to go see the old town, but most people will want to go out and see the larger island. See, they even let ships like that in. Surprising. But there's room for all. And here's a fairly recently built building with almost a Moorish style look to it and a lighthouse on it outside of town. So the Canary Islands in general are so busy, their economy has been growing about 5% a year for the last few decades, while the rest of, let's say, Spain has had trouble. The Canary Islands always seem to have plenty of visitors. And it was also a very wealthy place on its own, especially from the sugarcane and the rum trade, and then servicing ships that were on their way to the Americas. So a lot of the people in the Canary Islands had business relations in Spanish America. So from the Canary Islands, and particularly from Gran Canaria, many people in Venezuela, Puerto Rico, and other part Peru came from the Canary Islands. I have a friend from my home state of New Mexico whose name is Candelaria, which means he came from the Canary Islands, though he lives in the desert now. No, my home state's all beach and no surf, unlike this beautiful island. So this is in the old town of Las Palmas, and this is the Casa Colon, the former governor's mansion where Columbus is said to have stayed, and it's now a museum of history. And maybe many of you may have been there, but what I like about it is they say they have Columbus's original compass. And note to his guide for navigation is the baby Jesus and Maria. But that's a gimbal compass that he supposedly took to the Americas, came back, and it was finally donated to his museum. But Las Palmas is, even though it's a big city, has plenty of beautiful parks, like here in San Telmo. And then if you get out of town, then the mountains take over. This is at one of the top craters, the Roque Nublo, which is the rock in the clouds, and there are no clouds here. You see that spire that stands in the middle of this great valley. That's a remnant of what's called a volcanic plug, which is the harder rock that dried in the center of a volcano. But all around that, you have all these lovely little villages. Here's Fataga. And one of the tours goes to the Pico de Bandama, which is a great caldera about a kilometer wide. Again, people living on all these edges, growing, or else having a home just in the mountains. But it's pretty rugged country, and before modern roads, it was a great difficulty to come up and down by donkey and cart. And then one of the trips goes to Terror, which is a classic village up in the mountains above Las Palmas, which is a colonial town from 1600s, 1700s, most of the architecture. It's a World Heritage Site, and it is famous for its houses and also a church that's in the town. Here's the city hall, but it has its plaza, alcalde, and then the churches and beautiful doors and all the such things that we've been seeing around in Spain already. But it's a very quiet and a lovely mountain town, high and very crisp air up there, cooler than down on the shore. So many people actually retire up into this area so that they have a quieter life than in the roar of traffic and visitors down on the shore. So this is the great church there, which is called the Basilica del Virgen del Pino. And in the early 1700s, there was a vision of Mary in one of these trees, and therefore the church was dedicated to that vision, and in the style of the period, it's a basilica with, well, here it has funny gargoyles on the back of it. And there's a gargoyle that has, I guess they're pigeon spikes, but he looks like he needs a haircut. And then inside, it's a beautiful classic Catholic church. And then with the gilded vision of Mary and baby Jesus. So we've seen plenty of this in Spain already, but this is a particularly beautiful, not very elaborate, a very large church, but it's famous as the patron saint of the Gran Canaria. In the lowlands, there's a town called Arucas, which is in the plains where they grow bananas and sugarcane. Now, sugarcane originally came from India and then was planted in Madeira and then the Canaries, and then taken to the Caribbean and Brazil, and was the great trade of the time back when the only sweet you could get was out of pressing sugarcane. Now that, of course, business has changed, and so these haciendas have gone on to other crops, in this case bananas. So that's a major export of the Canary Islands. Even though I remember they were complaining that because of EU rules and opening of trade, they have to compete with all the Caribbean islands. They used to have an exclusive contract to feed Spain, but now the banana business is suffering from oversupply, so they've taken the hacienda into a hotel and a restaurant. It may or may not be on the tour tomorrow. I have to look in the details, but these beautiful farm estates are sort of famous in Spain and all of the Americas. Then the town nearby has this tremendous Gothic cathedral. The town itself is not very big, but they have the biggest church for the smallest town I've ever seen, the Iglesia de San Juan Bautista. And it's an example of how wealthy the Canaries became from this trade, both local produce, but also the business with the Americas. On the south end of the island, you have these great dunes of the Maspalomas, which look like a piece of the Sahara has landed on the edge of this island. And there are some salt ponds in it, and birds that nest there, rest there on their flyway to Africa. And so that's an unusual sight for a lavic, rocky island. Next we go over to La Palma, and here we have the angel in her castle as the symbol. I think, isn't this called heraldry when you design your own symbol? I'm sure all of you have one in your own home, but in your own castle with your own angel. But this is the great tradition here. So here's La Palma, which is a triangular island, but again, it has a tremendous extinct volcano in the center, called the Caldera de Tubultiente. But we will be going into Santa Cruz de la Palma on the eastern shore. And again, it's rugged, goes up almost 2,000 meters to the center, and then has roads around it, and a lot of development along the shore and houses up overlooking the sea. But you can see by this that access into the interior is very difficult. Like these islands, as you go to the western islands, get more steep and more rugged than Lanzarote, which is fairly flat by contrast. But again, a lot of development. This is a real problem in the islands because all the flat land becomes more valuable for hotels and resorts than they are for the agriculture. So only some areas are still very active in agriculture, and everybody's working in the tourist industry. And when I was there last, we took a four-wheel drive back up through the back country and up into the hills off road, which passed various abandoned farmhouses. Then we get up into this great pine forest that La Palma is famous for. Now this is all regrowth because most all of this had been cut centuries ago, and the islands have been getting drier and drier because of the lack of tree cover. Now this is protected as part of the national park, and they're growing up, and you can see it sort of creates its own humidity and cloud cover. And so when you get right out of the forest, though, then you're back into the cinderland. Now, the soil is rich, but it's the lack of water that it makes it a pretty difficult job for a tree to grow up here unless they're with other ones. So must be a loner. Got out of the forest somehow. But you can see across the valley there is a whole stretch of agricultural land and villages, and then the shore is usually where all the resort industry is. But that white in the valley is actually plastic that covers over the fields to hold the moisture through the night that's been gathered. And so, again, water is the crucial element that is necessary for the life on the islands because there isn't much water underground, so digging a well doesn't do much good. It has to be run off or else sort of captured out of the dew of the sea air. Here you have a lava flow that had coursed through the forest, and this is all regrowth, but these islands are still active. Even if they don't have a full eruption, they often have landslides because it's loose. And so it's a pretty dangerous place up there in these highlands because you have places like this. This is a cave that's a lava tube, and spelunkers will go up and go follow these things through. There's miles and miles of them in the mountains themselves. Here's just coming back down to the lowlands with one of their traffic cops. But on the very height, you have the Caldera de Tiburente and La Palma, and you can see the forest is pretty lush up there because of the cooler temperatures. The humidity in the air gets caught, and so Jasmine showed a picture of the waterfall of clouds, which then comes up from the sea. It precipitates water up into this area, and then it runs down through the lava tubes, and sometimes springs will pop up in the lowlands that just came underground all the way up from these high mountains. I'll just show you some of the indigenous flora because there isn't much, no megafauna. There used to be a gigantic lizard over a meter long that was then finally chased down for food by the settlers, but that's an extinct species. And there's no deer or bear or anything big like that, but they do have unusual flora. This is the arbutus, the Canary Islands, which is like a small kumquat, and then this is like a small pear that may have come from India by its name, the Persea indica. Then different kinds of berries. This is an indigenous berry that's sweet. And then lots of kind of thistles. This is called the gonosper. And then a flower called the canaria, which is a kind of almost a lily. One called the digitalis, I think because of the colorful flowers look like fingers. And then here's a beautiful sort of straw flower, perlicalis. And this is my favorite, the Lotus Bertholiti, which I probably is named after the botanist who put his name to it, but that's a desert flowering plant. And this one I saw in a garden there, but I have no idea what its name is. Maybe somebody would like to name it after somebody? Actiflora? It's a passion flower. All right. Well, I'll look that up. But I took this picture and nobody knew the name of it. But now I do. And then this one. This is my favorite. A red tejinaste, which is unusual to say the least. And then there's all kinds of other either indigenous or imported plants. Like the banana that's behind here it was brought from elsewhere. But this tree, I don't know what that is. I keep seeing it around, but it's not meant for climbing. And then this is a common cactus that grows along the cliffs and the shores, the euphorbia. I don't know if it makes you euphorous if you nibble it, but it's a characteristic cactus plant. There's a lot of pad cactus and others that are around there, and then other tumbleweeds and things in the desert. But you can see how expansive these islands are, and then they have steady trade winds. This is where Canary Islands were the destination of the sailors, and there'd be plenty of, let's say, date palms. This is a phoenix palm, and plenty of provisions for them because of the lushness of the tropical climate. This is the famous dragon tree, or in Spanish called the drago, which is indigenous to the Canary Islands. It's also on the island of Socotra on the near the Red Sea, or the Gulf of Aden. But this was worshipped by the Guanche people, and they gathered around it and had rituals in front of it, and then they'd cut the bark, and the sap from this tree looks like human blood. So it may have been used as sort of a replacement for human sacrifice, we don't know. But you can see it growing as an ornamental tree around the island. Now I'm going to take you to the next island where we don't have time to visit Tenerife. I imagine many of you have been there. So this is the biggest of them all with its small sidekick La Gomera. And I wonder where they got that Saltaire flag though. Anyway. But here we are. This is Tenerife me fecit. The island makes me happy. And this crest shows I like it, the angel getting shot out of a volcano. But anyway, whoever makes these things up, I don't know. But here's the, let's say, disputed pyramids of Guimar, which look like a pyramid from either the Mayan or other African places. And Thor Heyerdahl, the great Norwegian explorer and Imagineer, thought that these were built in antiquity and were part of the transmission in prehistoric times between the Mayan culture and the Egyptian culture and other parts of the world. And they were all buried in rubble and vegetation, but then as they've been encroached on by development in towns and such, they've now made a park out of them, and they're still digging to see where they came from. And just about a decade ago, they finally dug down to the base of them, and they found out that they were only built in the early 1800s. Oh well, because they were thought to be made as terraces when it was all agriculture, and to clear a field, they'd pile up the stones, and they just like to make them very neat and tidy. So, but for the local people, they say, oh yes, of course the Mayans and Phoenicians built this, and please, here come. So they have a museum sponsored by Fred Olsen, the Norwegian entrepreneur who sponsored Thor Heyerdahl in this exhibit, so it's questionable research, but anyway, it's a dramatic thing to see there, and maybe believe it if you wish. Then there's in Tenerife, there are a lot of places to see, like all these islands, but here's one of the villages I went to a couple of years ago, to Orotavo, which is again a classic village, started about 1750 or so, and then it's been called the village of balconies because all the houses are sort of perched out with an overhang. And again, this is classic Spanish design. And here's the town hall and the plaza. But the woodwork and the quality of this architecture makes this sort of a famous town because it's now again a World Heritage Site. And so you go, some of these houses are opened up as house museums, and you can see some of the traditions. Now this is the one that is right up in the high part of town with the balcony overlooking the sea, and then it has an interior courtyard. So this is a particularly fine example of that traditional architecture. And again with lush flowers and fountains and all such. But this is quite different than, let's say, the Club Meds down on the shore. But you can still go up and stay in that town, and again, you get a great ocean view and a nice breeze up there. And it has these classic churches and cupolas, and then, of course, a little modernism. I don't know who put the cell tower on the church. Wait till Pope Francis hears about that. But modernism has struck with a flair, and this is the famous Auditorio, or concert hall of Tenerife, designed by the great Spanish architect Calatrava. And so this looks like sort of a Greek helmet from ancient times, but it also sort of is a symbol of the island now as a modern piece of architecture, quite dramatic. So right next to all this traditional or ancient is these striking features. And of course, this is a great competition all around Spain to be more modern and more ancient at the same time. Well, here's the great hill or mountain over 3,000 meters of Mount Teide in Tenerife, and I was staring at this thing. I want to go skiing on that mountain and then go down, go in the ocean, come back and do another run, but it only gets snow a little bit sometimes, and it's usually barren. The last time I was there, the snow was gone and it looked like this. The volcano that it is. Now this is, again, an extinct volcano, so it is safe. They have a cable car that goes up high enough so you can go hike around it. But the famous thing about it is all this ragged lava that's all around. So the old flows are there, but they broke up the valleys and created standing rocks and very rough country. So it's pretty difficult to go hiking on the lava fields. But these things look like they're flames of rock that somehow just popped up out of the ground. Of course, it's all done by the violence of the eruption and then the erosion. And these are the famous standing rocks where you can go and walk around on. Sorry, this is not on our visit, but if you haven't been there, that's the most visited national park of all of Spain, and also the highest mountain in all of Spain. And so it has this fantastic rockery. But again, very, very rugged country. Nobody literally lives up there. There's no farmland, but you can see people go up there just to go hiking around in it. So this is where the Canary Islands is. They're among the most dramatic places in the world, and certainly worth going back and spending more time to commune with the rocks and talk to them. I'm sure they have something to say if you're quiet enough. And but then it goes right back down to the sea, and you can see how many people are living on the islands and sort of perched out over the ocean. So the sea is sort of both gives and takes away. There's a lot of erosion, and so this unstable volcanic rock occasionally gets broken down on the shore. That doesn't stop people from building resorts there. You can see the rough over on the left, the waves breaking over the seawall. And if there isn't a beach, then there's a pool. And this is a little town in Tenerife near Santa Cruz where they have these tidal pools. And when I was there, I was just sort of watching the water come and go. And there was a place where you can go to go swimming in the natural pools of the ocean coming in if you, let's say, have shoes on. And this was one where the waves would break over into the natural pool. You could go wading, and then a whole wave would come sweeping in and renew the water. Now, this is in marine biology important because in these pools, a lot of spawning and littoral life is raised in these kind of pools. And then, of course, the predators come and catch some of it. But out on all of these islands, it's very steep ocean nearby. There's none of the, let's say, the coral reefs that we're used to in many Pacific islands or Caribbean islands, because these islands have popped up from a fairly deep water. They're on the continental shelf, but the outlying waters are 2,000 to 3,000 meters deep, and so there are only a few places where there's good scuba diving, but all of these waters are full of dolphins, and especially this is loggerhead turtle. They traditionally came up on some of the beaches to lay their eggs, but now those beaches have been taken over by the humans, so they are endangered and protected, and they, again, like in many other parts of the world, they have programmed to try to reintroduce the turtles back to the beaches. The other problem that's been in the news, I picked this out of the Barcelona newspaper as we were leaving, is the contract from the Spanish government to the Repsol, the main oil company of Spain, to begin exploration of the shelves around the Canary Islands to try to provide Spain with their own supply of oil. And so this has riled up Greenpeace and some of the residents of the Canary Islands that do not want the oil industry moving into their ports and into their offshore because of the importance of the tourism. So that's the classic conflict in our times. So you may hear more about it, but again, it's a thirsty world for oil, but it may be a common sight in the ports we're going in the future to see big oil rigs. But meanwhile, life goes on, and it's a fairly happy place, I'd say, the Canary Islands. And so I just leave you a few last scenes of the sea, because we'll have the pleasure of coming in by ship rather than jumping off an airplane. And you can see as we approach the island sort of rise out of the mist, and they're quite beautiful. A number of years ago, an oceanographic survey ship found on the shelf going out to the mid-Atlantic a great landslide, in this area is indicated, and it was thought that about 5,000 years ago an island fell off the shelf, and so it has been speculated that there was another island out there, and perhaps the legend of Atlantis is actually from this occurrence. But even more problematic is the shelf is so unstable in a lot of these places, and you have a new island coming up to the west of El Hierro, a volcanic development in the sea under the hotspot. And so that may produce another island, but we may also have the problem of these undersea landslides. And geological evidence showed that a few million years ago, some landslide in this area created a tsunami that swept all across the Atlantic and struck the whole coast of the Americas. And so that's something that undersea geology is keeping a watch on to see if any of this might happen again, and we hopefully never have the tsunami effect again in our time. But that's where the sea is alive, this land is alive, and it can be dangerous, but on the other hand, it's very beautiful, and I know we'll all enjoy our time in the Canary. With that, I wish you a good trip there, and I'll see you ashore. Thank you very much.